Okay. Okay, so let's continue with the second talk from Mayalen, which will tell us about metadiversity search for the open-ended discovery of self-organized structures, with a hard title.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so thank you for inviting me and for the organization of this workshop. Yes, so I recently joined the Google team, but today I'm actually going to talk to you about some early work that I did in my PhD about this metadiversity search I did, which is hard to say. Yeah, so just for the little story about how I got interested into Alife. So I think I didn't know any of it before I joined the Flowers Lab, to be honest. I was although already interested into AI for science, especially for biology. And so when I joined the Flowers team, we decided to set up my PhD around a collaboration with a biotechnology company who was developing this kind of fancy printer device that was basically some kind of 3D printer for cells. So it would print living cells, and then you would kind of see the tissues with all kind of interesting effects. And so the aim of my PhD was to think how we can develop algorithms ultimately for this kind of systems. But obviously, when you start a PhD, you don't want right away to develop your machine learning algorithm on this kind of complex system. So I was searching for a numerical system that would be easier to run and that would have these similar interesting emergent properties, and that was around the same time that Lenya came about, so it was like early 2019. And so we had a teammate in our team that showed it to me and to my PI, and we find it really nice, and we decided to go into this. Sorry. And so as I kind of discovered dig into the Lenya system, that just opened me to the whole world of artificial life, open-endedness, and everything. And so I got pretty interested into this. So that's kind of my little story about AI. And yes, so I'm generally super interested into how can we use AI to assist discovery in complex systems. So I think self-organized structures are super fascinating. You have really the emergence of these complex patterns, both morphologically and functionally, and this complexity emerges simply from the local interactions of the local elements, and this can lead to super interesting patterns. And the cool thing about this, it means that by playing with the parameters of the system, we can potentially, in the lab, recreate structures with interesting complexity. Potentially, we can control the emergent property and do a bunch of interesting things. But yeah, obviously, it's a very challenging task, and because the mapping between the low-level parameters and the emergent outcomes is highly nonlinear and challenging, and so that's where I believe that AI can be really a powerful tool to assist discoveries in the systems. And so that's what I framed in my PhD as the automated discovery problem. So Clem already talked about it a bit this morning, so might be a bit redundant, but it's always good. Basically, the automated discovery is this idea that you can use an AI as a discovery assistant to drive exploration in a complex system. So you can think of the AI as some kind of scientist or discovery assistant that is in charge of generating the sequence of parameters like the sequence of experiments that you would try in your complex system. So at each step of the exploration loop, it selects a set of parameters, launch an experiment with those parameters, observe the outcomes, eventually characterize it with some learned representation, store everything in its database, and then it can reuse this knowledge to select the next set of parameters, and so on and so forth, until it reaches exploration budget. And so at the end of this exploration process, you have a database of discoveries. And so obviously the central question, which was the central question of my PhD, is, well, what kind of decision model making should we put into our AI such that the database of discovery is maximally interesting for the scientist who is exploring the system. And yeah, another important thing was also the sample efficiency of the discovery, because so there are two important reasons. As I said, I was originally interested in transposing those algorithms to actual physical system. So we have a small budget of experiment. And also in general, I think when we think about open-ended discovery, like sample efficiency is really important because we want to discover things that are interesting and don't waste like time or energy on something that is not useful or that we already know, for instance. I'm just gonna drink it. And so when you look at the literature of existing approaches that try to address this automatic discovery problem, you usually find these three big families of approaches, even though I would say that more than 99% of them fall in the first two categories. So the most common one is optimization. So here, usually have a clear target in mind, and so you're going to use your experimental budget to try and find parameters that get you as close as possible to this target. But you also have predictive approaches, where here scientists are rather trying to learn some kind of predictive model of your system. So think of it as like some kind of surrogate model, and then you're going to use your data to, you're going to use your budget to generate data that can maximally improve the performance of your prediction model. And finally, you have the diversity-driven approaches, which are way less common, at least in the AI for science literature. But that's actually the kind of approaches that I worked on during my PhD. And so all of the work I'm going to present you today is going to fall in this last category. And it's less problem specific, so you don't try to achieve a specific objective, but rather you're using your experimental budget to find behaviors that are maximally representative of the discovery that you can achieve. So just to go back a bit, in diversity search you really evaluate the whole database of discovery that you get, versus in optimization or predictive method you usually only keep the best parameters and then discard everything. I mean, I think you all kind of know already about this.
Maybe a question about this diversity search.
Yeah.
So when you run this algorithm, is it possible that you get two parameters that actually fall very close or in the same point of this kind of behavioral dimensions?
Yeah.
And in that case, which one do you keep, or do you keep both?
So you keep all of them.
All of them, okay.
So basically you have a certain experimental budget that is fixed, and then you try different things, and your aim is to cover that space maximally.
I see, okay.
In an experimental budget. Okay. But if you're not good, then
I see.
That's your problem.
Okay.
And so the reason why we need diversity search methods are interesting here is really like they can help us, as I said, like cover this behavior space much more efficiently that you would do with more, let's say, naive strategy where you only explore the parameter space, because the system that we consider here are obviously highly nonlinear, chaotic, so you have this strong like attractor or butterfly effect. Kim already said this morning, but it means that you have super large region of the parameter space, so that's going to lead to similar outcomes. And reversely, you might have like tiny regions in the parameter space that lead to a wide variety of behaviors. And so we're trying to have more efficient algorithm that can focus sampling in these interesting regions to lead to maximally diverse outcomes. And so there are several approaches that have been proposed in the literature to do diversity search. You might have heard of novelty search, quality diversity. In my work and in the team, we are using those goal-directed exploration process. So again, Clément mentioned them a bit this morning, but I'm going to repeat the idea. So here, the keyword is goal, which means that at each step of the iteration loop, you're starting by explicitly fixing a goal in that behavior space. And the way we generate that goal is through these intrinsic motivation signals. So there are like different flavors of it, but usually when you want to achieve diversity, you're gonna target goals that are novel, so that are not in regions that are already explored, and that are also learnable, so that they're not too far away from what you already achieved. So you start by sampling this goal, then you have a second model that infers parameters that it thinks are going to be the most promising to achieve that goal. So typically, here you can look at the history of what you achieved so far, see that this point led to a behavior that is not too far from your target goal. So you can start again from there and then apply some mutation or some more fancy local optimization to select your next set of parameters. Then you run an experiment with those parameters. This gives you a new behavior, and probably you're not going to achieve your original goal, but it's not such a problem. The important thing is that you have a new set of points, so new information, and so that you can update your two models so that you're better able to sample goals and also to achieve your goals faster. So next time I will be able to sample a goal a bit further, and I will also be able to achieve that goal faster. And so with kind of by repeating these goal-directed steps, then usually you're quite efficient at covering the reachable behavior space, or at least much more efficient than if you would just do this grid search or random search in the parameter space. So that's kind of the general intuition behind those algorithms, but some very critical thing that I've intentionally omitted is how do you actually define this behavior space and this outcome space, and that turns out to be super important, and that's true for all diversity search approaches, because basically for these approaches to be efficient, you need that space to be relatively low dimensional, because if you have a limited budget, you cannot cover like a huge space, and so it's really a question: how do you start from a high dimensional output like an image or a video in linear, and how do you compress it into a low dimensional space that you can then learn to cover? And so this is a really hard question, especially in linear or in complex systems in general, because these systems can really generate a wide variety of behaviors, and it's really unclear what are good descriptors of these behaviors and what will lead to interesting diversity. And it's even more than that. Like here I'm showing you some discovery of linear. We all are pretty familiar with it, but imagine starting with a new complex system that you don't know anything about. You don't know what can come out, so how should you choose this space is really a strong question. So the first kind of natural idea that we had in the first paper was to say, well, let's just use some unsupervised representation learning technique like a VIE that we train to compress. Basically, we take the last image of linear, and then we just train a VIE to compress and then reconstruct these images. And then we simply use like the latent space of the VIE as our characterization space. And because it should learn to compress some relevant information, then doing diversity search in that space might lead to some interesting discoveries. And indeed it led to discoveries that are quite different than what you would get with exploration in other spaces, but it was still, yeah.
So I feel like this is a bit like delaying the problem, because the data that you choose to train the VAE kind of makes VAE to learn representation of that data.
Something that I didn't mention. So we tried two things. One of them was using a pre-trained VAE on some, so that makes the assumption that you already have a database of patterns. So of course, that's also limiting. So what we propose in this paper is to actually train it online. So as you make new discovery, you update the VAE. But it turns out that this was still very limiting, because the VAE basically, at some point, it will stop evolving. And that's because we were constraining a lot the dimension of the feature space. I think it was 8 dimension or 10 dimension, because we wanted it to be quite low. And with that little latent space, the VAE can only learn like really the coarse grained features, like maybe the global color, like shape and position. but it really cannot learn like fine grain or more details. So it will really lack plasticity, and that shows how much the learned representation evolves through exploration, and it will basically saturate very fast and then stop learning everything. So at the end, even using like this online learned approach, it will be almost equivalent to having a pre-trained VAE that we don't modify.
Did you try to retrain from scratch every time?
So basically, for instance, I train with different seed or different niches of pattern, and it will still be very similar at the end, because there is a strong bias by the reconstruction loss of first learning the same kind of features. I have some extra slides that I can show at the end, but at least for the VAE, there are probably other approaches that could be more sensitive to data. Especially, we tried also contrastive approaches. But basically, whatever the space I would choose in linear, I would have this very frustrating results that the algorithm was indeed super efficient at finding diversity in the space that it was searching diversity, but this would not lead to diversity in all the spaces as a side effect. So I was really confirming this thing that how should we choose a good space and what is a good space? And so that's what we are showing here. So you can see like the diversity measured in different space. Some of the space are hand-defined, some of the space are learned, even learned online, but we would still have this kind of results. And I think...
Yeah, it's not very bright.
Okay. One good example is this Fourier space. So this one of the space I came up with. So it's basically like a Fourier descriptors of the images that's traditionally used like to describe texture or this kind of things. And I was expecting to get some amount of diversity out of it. And it turns out that the algorithm found a way to generate these straight stripes in linear, but with all kind of frequencies. And this turned out to maximize diversity in that space. So, you know, it was to some extent interesting, but it definitely, it's not what we consider intuitive as diverse in linear. And none of them really was. So yeah, that's what kind of naturally led me to this intuition of meta-diversity search, which is kind of an extension of the standard diversity search where instead of trying to seek diversity in a single characterization space, maybe like an open-ended discovery assistant should continuously try to learn new ways to represent the data and then search diversity in those spaces. So that's really the basic intuition behind this meta-diversity search. And yeah, just put here some images, just to do some analogy with human discovery, where we are very good at coming up with new ways to see the world. So new measurement tools that enable us, for instance, to measure even basic things like temperature, pH, voltmeters, to some very advanced tool like a microscope or a telescope. And this really gives us new ways to see variations in the world that we were not really aware of. And it's through those lenses that then we can try to make new discoveries in those spaces. And so it's really an important driver of this open-ended discovery, always trying to seek new ways to represent the world. So yeah, this meta-diversity search is you have this outer loop where the agent has to learn new representation spaces of the discoveries, and then in an inner loop, you do the more traditional diversity search in those different spaces. And a third kind of ingredient that we added to this meta-diversity search was this idea that because we don't have infinite budget, we should probably add some feedback from the end user, like the scientist or the person who's interested in using this discovery assistant, so that we prioritize exploration in the spaces of interest. So that's the general intuition about meta-diversity search, but of course in practice it's a really hard question. How do you implement this, especially for the first point? How do you continually learn diverse representation spaces of your data that are relevant? And also the last point, how do you adapt the search to the preferences of a human that you don't know at first, because the preference obviously is what the human judged interesting is something that is not only subjective but that evolves in time. So how do you play with this? So I'm just now going to show you one possible implementation of this concept that we proposed in a 2020 paper. So it's a bit old, but it was just one new architecture that we proposed to try and address this. So in order to solve this first challenge, how to learn diverse representation space, we proposed a modular and dynamic architecture, so basically it started like this. It started as before. We start with the VIE. As we are making new discovery in Lenya, we are training it online, so the VIE learns to encode this data. And as it makes new discovery, as I said before, at some point it will start to saturate. So when this happens, what we do is like we freeze this space and then fit different clusters in that space, or kind of fit a boundary. And that gives us some redirecting criteria for future patterns, such that like some of them will be sent to the left and some of them will be sent to the right. And then what we do is that we instantiate new modules or new VAs that we train on these niches of patterns. And there are also some additional tricks that we made to ensure that the child VAE learn features that are different from the one of the parent. So that way we had like so we have different VAEs, and we repeat this process as new data is coming, train it online, and so on and so forth. So you have like this progressive hierarchy of feature space that is learned through exploration and that is continuously extended as exploration goes. And then we simply, like, to go back to this exploration loop, we simply replace the monolithic representation with this hierarchy of representation, such that now when the agent is sampling a goal, it's first selecting a space and then sampling a goal in that space. And so that's kind of the results that we got from this approach. So this is a tree of discoveries that was built by the exploration algorithm. And you can see like the way it learned to partition the patterns and to represent each niche of pattern and then make discoveries in those different spaces. And yeah, so already visually we can see that, I mean, this is all qualitative, but we can see that in a different space it was able to discover different types of diversity. So for instance, diverse spatially localized patterns, but also this kind of Turing texture-like patterns. So the images that I'm showing on the right, they are actually coming from this exploration run. And something else that was quite interesting in those results is that, so basically in this run, it also was able to discover a few of Lenya creators, which are, you know, if you don't give any bias to the exploration, they're actually quite hard to find because they live in this really tiny region of the parameter space that we were considering. But what was even more interesting is that they came out of a niche of from an unexpected niche of these patterns where the exploration algorithm originally discovered this wavy kind of soup patterns, and by learning to characterize those patterns and then seeking variation in there, it then discovered this kind of, again, of soup that were propulsing the Lenya creature. So yeah, it was just an interesting example of one of the main arguments in open-endedness, that sometimes great things comes from unexpected paths.
Yeah, just as an observation, I think like in Bernoulli's original Lenya, like the original glider, if you collide two of them, it eventually creates like a Turing pattern. So like they interfere and then it just expands. Yeah. So it might just be that Turing patterns also have like a propensity to, if you take a smaller chunk of it, that might be a soliton. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So by exploring like a high diversity of Turing patterns, you might actually be able to find a high diversity of solitons.
Yeah. So that's kind of the thing that was here, but for at least 5 years ago, for me, it was really surprising. Like, if I would have searched this right away, I would definitely have gone more to this part of the trees.
I was just wondering, so in this case, you train a VAE on images or on the videos?
No, just,
so just the final image?
Images,
Okay.
but definitely would be better on video. Yeah.
Still looking for a video.
Yeah, also what I didn't mention here is that this is an unguided variant, so the agent was uniformly sampling spaces and then uniformly sampling all in that space, so there is no guidance from the human yet. So then the second kind of variant that we tried was to incorporate human feedback in the exploration loop, and we did it in a very intuitive manner, where we would have a human browse at a few discoveries that are made on the different spaces as exploration progress, and then provide some feedback, and then we would just use this feedback as in our goal sampling model, so that the agent prioritize goals in the spaces of interest. Yes?
Still to this Turing pattern niche leading to the creatures niche. Actually, what is the role of initial configurations here? How do you sample those further?
I don't have a slide here, but for this work we were actually using CPPNs. So it's part of the parameterization. So we had parameters both for the linear dynamics and also for the initial states, and these were parameters of the CPPN.
I wanted to say that when I played with the original Lenya, and like Bert was showing this interesting manifold where the solitons form, I felt like this is the region where the initial configuration really matters, and kind of having like a small patch of noise would lead to everything dying out, and having a big patch of noise lead to the Turing pattern. And if it's the exact right size patch of noise, then it would form the soliton. So maybe actually just changing the initial configuration in that niche really triggers the soliton formation.
Yeah, definitely. So here in that work, I was really not having any constraint about trying to find solitons. So this is definitely not the most efficient way to find them, and what Clément presented this morning is a much better way to find them. It was just to illustrate that sometimes you find interesting things from unexpected paths. But yeah. So then to test this second variant, we did this little experiment with, it was not actual human, it was simulated humans, one that would be interested in finding. So we had basically filters, like classifiers that were categorized either pattern as being spatially localized or Turing-like, and then we would simulate humans as preferring one or the other category. And kind of as expected, we showed that then the tree of discoveries would adapt to this feedback by basically using more budget and exploring more the paths of interest of the different humans, so different parts of the tree. And this was really sparse feedback, so we only had the human looking at the discoveries when there was a split in the hierarchy, so something like 11 times. And yeah, that's just to finish. We then tried to make some quantitative results out of this, which is also a really hard question, because how do you quantify interesting diversity from the perspective of the human? So what we proposed was this kind of proxy metric based on human feedback, where we made this small user interface where we would show a human different set of linear patterns that are projected into different spaces. And the set of patterns will be representative of the diversity from the space, from the point of view of the space, so meaning that there would be like distant in that space. And then the human will select the set of patterns that he thinks are the most representative of your own intuitive notion of diversity, basically. And we would do that many times, and then we would select the space that correlates more with the human intuitive notion of diversity. And then we show that in those spaces, basically, when you look at the diversity search in single space, so for instance, the EMGF VIE, for those two categories of pattern, the VAE was quite strong in one category of pattern, so this specially localized pattern, but it was as bad as random exploration, even worse for the Turing-like patterns. Whereas the Heimjeb-Holmes non-guided variant would usually sit somewhere in the middle, and as soon as you add the guidance, then it would go up in both cases. So yeah, that was kind of the results of this paper. And yeah, just to conclude quickly, so yeah, I basically think that diverse search is a super interesting set of approaches for scientific discovery in Alife, but also in other fields. Even though it's not used so much in AI for science, but I think it's interesting, and actually I didn't present those works today, but these are a bunch of collaborations that I did also during my PhD. And we showed in each case that diversity search was useful to find a set of representative behaviors in this system, and for the scientists that they were not aware of prior exploration. But in each of these work, there were definitely some work involved in setting up this characterization space, which is the main issue of these approaches. So as we want to move towards more open-ended discovery, I think this concept of meta-diverse search, which is simply this idea that we should not only try to solve to solve new problems in a given space, but search for create a completely new space for computation to emerge in. And this is also related to other concepts such as variation versus measure transition in evolutionary biology. There is also this notion of exploratory or transformational creativity, and this all related concept that you want really to create new spaces for computation and emergence through it. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you.
We have some time for a few questions. Any questions? There's one there, or I have a question actually. I was wondering, so you showed this all diversity search, and you also kind of semi-answered my question, but I would like to ask it anyway. If I have a specific goal in mind, let's say I want precisely these creatures, for example, that move from left to right or something, but I also want to have a diverse set of solutions to this problem. So in a way, I want to both maximize a specific goal, but also to get a big diverse set of solutions. So is there a way to adapt this kind of diversity search to this kind of problem?
Yeah, that's basically quality diversity. So
Okay.
it's like you basically have one metric that is your performance. So let's say how far away this creature can move.
Right.
And then you have other descriptors from diversity, so maybe the morphology of your creatures, or again, you have to come up with a set of descriptors. Right. And usually what you would do is try to cover the space for achieving diversity, but you will only also keep the high-performing solution. So it's like adding a third dimension in your space, if you wish, which is quality, and then you will filter all the bad-performing.
In that case, do you have to choose the trade-off between revisiting a space, revisiting a location which you already have a candidate for it to hope to get a better candidate, versus, exploration versus exploitation, essentially.
Yeah,
so,
it's basically a trade-off.
Okay, I see.
Usually you prioritize cells where you didn't find a solution yet, but sometimes also when you explore a region, you might actually end up back in another region, right, and still find a better solution. Because
in this quality diversity that you mentioned, how do you constrain your dynamics to be in some region of your diversity space while also optimizing for the goal?
So when you sample a goal, when you sample a goal in a certain region of the space, you're never ensured that you're actually going to end up there. But the idea is you're sampling in an explored area, so that
But I have a single goal, so the goal is not sampled; it's always the same.
Okay.
But I want different solutions to this goal in a way.
Yeah, but that's what I'm calling a goal. It's also a point in the like in the characterization space. So think of it
I
as
see. Okay.
different morphologies.
Okay. I see.
So you're trying to cover the diversity space.
I see. You
while
include everything in
finding
the goal.
high
Okay. I see.
solution. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
I guess you could look at it as trying to maximize like the volume of your quality diversity. So
see.
like you're trying to get as much diversity, x and y axis,
Mhm.
and then the height of it being your quality, so how much it moves.
Yeah.
Just trying to maximize the volume of that.
And the most famous approach is MapEdit. I don't know if you're aware of it.
Yeah, but this one, I looked at this one, but it felt a bit like, okay, you take a grid in your space and then just take the best one in the grid, which feels like, okay, you chose the grid, why not another grid? And,
So yeah, it's just a discrete version of this goal-based
Right.
exploration.
Yes.
But at the end, you're trying to cover the space, and if you
Yes.
add the quality, you also try to keep only the high-performing solution.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Other questions? If not, we can thank Maya again.